Hello, everyone. Welcome to KnowledgeFlow's series on critical thinking and digital media literacy. We're going to learn to spot disinformation, and to do that, we're going to get our hands on a few shortcuts. And those shortcuts will allow us to become more unhackable than we already are. So I hope you're enjoying this series. There are more sessions in this group of workshops. And let's get started. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to be up there in the corner. We're going to be delving into what it takes to spot misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and various other types of falsities. And for that, we're always looking for an unfair advantage because we don't have that much time and we want some shortcuts. So how do we verify claims? Well, it's not enough for me to tell you that I'm Claudiu Popa and I work for a few different companies, Informatica, Managed Privacy Canada, Data Risk Canada, that I'm the co-founder of KnowledgeFlow. No, you need evidence. You need proof. And that proof is independent. You want to ask what makes you a professional. Well, here are some badges. Those badges belong to other organizations that have professionally certified me. That professional certification is very important because it says that it's not just me telling you something, it's somebody else validating it. So if you go online and you look them up, you can take that code and you can verify that it's current. You can also watch TV and you can see that I give these types of talks through television stations, through radio stations, through podcasts, and a variety of other multimedia mediums. So the important thing to remember is that you should ask for proof. You don't have to distrust everything. You always hear that you should question everything. You don't have to question everything. The only thing you have to do is, before trusting, simply verify. Find the evidence, be satisfied with it, understand it, and you're good, right? Because you don't want to be finding yourself in a situation where you're passing on incorrect information, wrong information, or even malicious information. So you can look these things up. You can look me up on Google Scholar, for example, and see some of the white papers that I've collaborated with other people on or have published myself. You can look for the books that were published by reputable publishers. And that's the kind of critical thinking that you need to apply to various aspects of your life. Naturally, not to everything, because we already have proof about the things in our lives that we can count on. The bus will likely show up around the time that it says on the pole, right? It's driven by a legitimate bus driver, right? It's not a kidnapper driving this bus. You can tell that the bus belongs to the transit authority, right? You don't have to go to their head office and validate that they exist. But in order for you to make the most of your experiences online, your digital experience, you need to know how to cut through the falsities and get at the truth. And in order to do that kind of cutting, well, you're going to need to have a razor. Now, I remember watching a TED Talk on how kids should be playing with sharp objects and how it's totally okay to give kids sharp objects because, you know, they'll figure it out. It was a very convincing TED Talk. Obviously, if you give sharp objects to kids, and all of you young adults, children, seniors have played with sharp objects, and you can probably remember a time where you poked yourself or drew some blood. That's not the purpose of this talk today. Today, we're talking about imaginary razors with which we will cut right through the claims that are being made either through ads, through messages that is meant to influence us to maybe buy something, or claims made by malicious people, cyber criminals, that tell you that something is urgent, you need to act now, otherwise something terrible will happen. So here's your handy guide to doing just that, right? So are we really talking about playing with sharp objects? Well, we needed to make it fun. We needed to make it engaging. And one of my favorite things to talk about is imaginary philosophical razors. You can look that up online. They are a thing. They're essentially shortcuts when you're trying to think clearly about what it is that you're supposed to believe online, because there's no filter online. Anyone can write anything they want. This is why your teachers have probably told you that if you go on Wikipedia, it's not entirely trustworthy, because many people can modify the text in Wikipedia, and many people do. There's a system for validating it. There's a system for blocking those kinds of changes, but fundamentally, it was meant to be a system that is collaborative, and it helps many people get at the truth by allowing them to cooperate in the writing of various articles. So when you get clickbaited, it's because you've read some kind of a claim, and that claim made you get to a conclusion. That conclusion might be an uncomfortable situation, which is an incomplete sentence. You won't believe what happened next, or the types that are that trail off, right? The types of text or links that are urgent, that you just need to click on this right now just to see how badly things turned out, right? And what's the harm of clickbait? Well, clickbait starts to record what you're up to as soon as you click. Sometimes it even records how long you've spent thinking about clicking, right? And we know about clickbait because we know about doom scrolling. We know that it's difficult to stop scrolling. Well, that is one way to keep us engaged, right? And those types of different types of claims that we see online are likely going to fall into a few categories. The Canadian government puts them in 3 buckets. One of them is very simple: lies, things that are not true. That is called misinformation. It's usually posted by people who are misinformed. They are wrong. They didn't do their homework. They don't know what they're talking about. It's a claim. It's written with words and letters, and because it looks the same as other words that are written using recycled electrons, some people could be fooled, because a lot of people don't realize just how easy it is to write stuff online, right? It's very interesting that you're going to be able to discern between what is true and what is false based on some of the shortcuts we'll talk about today. The second kind is a word that you've perhaps not heard before: malinformation. Mal obviously is short for malicious. Malicious information is based on something that's true, but it's twisted in a way that misleads and causes harm. So it's meant to deceive us, right? So you make a correct statement, right? The moon exists. It's up there in the sky, but this month it's going to be closer to us than ever before. And a lot of people are going to panic because they're going to think that it might be falling because it's getting into an orbit that is way too close. And we need to go and stock up on water and toilet paper. Obviously, a lot of these types of claims will start with something that is technically true and then go off the rails from there. My reaction is ridicule it. laugh about it, joke about it, recognize it, and say, well, that's pretty silly. Finally, this is not funny. Disinformation is the kind of misleading claim that is pasted onto the internets, and it's made to maliciously manipulate people into taking some action based on false pretenses, false claims. These are the people who have been lied to. Let's say you see an example of someone and they're saying, well, this guy is a criminal. Click here if you want him killed. That type of thing will collect a whole bunch of signatures based on false pretenses, because people always, almost always, react emotionally. And we have to be aware that when there's a claim to an emotional response, then we need to be skeptical of that. We need to be skeptical of where it's coming from. We need to be skeptical of our own impulse, right? And that's why it's the most serious of all. Disinformation can start with something as innocuous as clickbait. Clickbait basically appeals to FOMO, right? The fear of missing out. You certainly don't want to miss out on this truism that we're going to tell you here that other people don't know about. You click on it and suddenly you are being bombarded with a whole bunch of false claims. And some of these hoaxes can easily be debunked. You go online, you go to Hoax Slayer, you go to other websites like Snopes, and you can look them up. There are networks of hoax slayers. You too could be a hoax slayer, certainly after this workshop. You can have fun debunking a whole lot of stuff, because once you know the secrets of critical thinking, you know the secrets of unhackability. So a lot of the pandemic was spent debunking fake news. We saw all kinds of claims online about viruses and vaccines and villains of all kinds. And of course, we saw that a lot of them were manipulating people into giving up their money and being defrauded, right? A fraud is different from theft. Theft is when you take someone's money. Fraud is when you convince them to give you their money under false pretenses, right? And those false pretenses can have really negative impacts. In some cases, if you can convince people not to trust medicine, for example, they will reject proper medical treatment and risk their lives in the process, right? These kinds of tricks are created by people who really don't care how you feel. They don't know you. They don't know much of their audience. They just write words and look for the most impactful things, not caring whether something is right or wrong, right? More recently, we're looking at the advent of AI. And AI, we've seen it all. We've seen children holding pets. We've seen all kinds of presidents looking like they're being arrested. We've seen all sorts of fake images that are effortlessly created by artificial intelligence, and they are in action shots. And those action shots are designed to draw an emotional response. And of course, because they're images, they're visual, they create an emotional response, because that's a part of our brain that reacts impulsively, right? It's at that point that we have to pump the brakes and say, wait a minute, this is pretty cool, right? It's neat. I appreciate how it was done, but let me check this. Let me verify. Let me call a friend. Let me look it up, right? And of course, we're not going to just Google randomly. As I said, we look at hoax busting sites like Hoaxslayer, Snopes, and others, depending on the kinds of lies that we hear, because there are some sites that talk about and focus on fake news and politics, and others focus on frauds and scams, right? And we need to develop some trust in those. So one of the things I was doing during the pandemic was literally reading pages and pages of those hoax busting efforts. It's a lot of fun because they actually cite sources, and you want sources. You want to see where the original information that can be trusted comes from. You want to see the original documents, and you want to be able to say, yeah, I believe that's incorrect. I agree with this assessment. And of course, there are fake hoax busting sites out there. So you have to be careful because some fraudulent sites actually just call themselves hoax slayers, hoax busters, hoax eliminator, investigators, whatever, right? So you need to develop that critical thinking muscle, and that's the kind of workout that we're about to get. And one of the things that we do at the KnowledgeFlow Foundation is we adopt Einstein's own razor. Einstein came up with a statement, and that statement said quite simply, everything should be as simple as it can be, but not simpler. In other words, everything must be explained as simply as possible, but don't oversimplify things, right? That's very important because what it essentially says is if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And if you simplify it too much, then you risk losing information. Naturally, being a genius and a physicist, he also said it in a much more complicated way. He said, it can scarcely be denied that the supreme goal of all theory is to make the irreducible basic elements as simple and as few as possible without having to surrender the adequate representation of a single datum of experience. So we took that, we distilled it, we now understand it as a simple shortcut, which we call a razor, which we call Einstein's razor. Everything should be as simple as it can be, but not simpler. So we simplified it with an acronym, the CRISP scan. CRISP stands for consider the source, read beyond the page, investigate the clues, scan for bias, proceed with caution. CRISP. So here's the quick CRISP scan. We're going to talk about sharpening your razor and cutting through the BS. I call the bad security blog that I write the BS blog. And I have a lot of fun writing about security. I also have a BP blog, a bad privacy blog. And that's where I post some of my writings. So if you're looking for rants and questioning evidence and looking for proof, that's where you'll find it. As for now, let's consider the source. Considering the source means who's published the information. When we started this presentation, I told you that my books were published by reputable publishers. It's up to you to look them up. It's very easy to look them up, right? You find a picture of the book, any number of them online, you look up and you will see that those publishers exist and they're quite notable publishers, right? That's not to say that people who self-publish books are not legitimate professionals. They create their own books, they publish them by their own means, and they get other partners in the process to promote them. So they partner with trustworthy organization to give them that legitimacy, right? So there are different ways to gain public trust, but be aware that if some of those steps are skipped and somebody just publishes a PDF, puts it out there and says, this is the answer to literally everything, well, then you take the risk that you might be misinformed. So you ask these questions. Do they have standards? Do they have a history of sharing false information? Do they have some sort of verifiable reference online, right? So is it published anonymously or did somebody put their real name behind it? That's important Because if it's just anonymous, then the publisher is basically saying, don't worry about who I am. Pay attention to what I'm writing here, right? So we have a shortcut for that, and we call it Hitchens' razor. Hitchens' razor says that if somebody asserted something without evidence, if they didn't provide proof, but they shook their fist and said, yeah, this is true, well, then you can dismiss it without further evidence being needed. You don't think twice about somebody who refuses to share proof or shares inadequate proof, because in many cases, they're looking to waste your time. And we've seen that with chain letters. They challenge recipients to basically say, well, here's 2 screenfuls of text about something really serious. What are you going to do? Are you going to research it, or are you just going to click forward and send it on to dozens of your friends and family? Some people cut corners, and they miss the opportunity to verify the information, and their reputation can suffer as a result. So it's important to remember Hitchens' razor because it can save us a lot of time, and we can typically reference it, right? That's the kind of benefit that we get from any number of razors, like Einstein's razor, where we simply say, well, maybe you've oversimplified matters, right? So no source, no need to discuss. Moving on, read beyond the page, right? So if there's proof for this, it's likely easy to find. Remember that. You shouldn't have to dig too deep to find evidence. In fact, it should be provided by whoever's making the claim. When you pick up a book, there are references. I spent a couple of years putting together references for the information that I wrote in my last book on cyber fraud, on the Canadian Cyber Fraud Handbook. And that's important. There are dozens of pages of reference. And that's because the easier you make it for the reader, the more trustworthy you become, right? And because no one's going to check all of your references, well, you gain their trust by supplying 1, 2, 3 different pages of exhaustive, trustworthy references. And those references have got to be trustworthy. Otherwise, if you're referencing, let's say, Wikipedia, well, that's probably not enough. But Wikipedia does make it easier to find reputable sources. They're typically right on the page. Go directly to those sources, go directly to those publishers and mention them. So we're not saying don't use Wikipedia. We're saying don't cite Wikipedia. Use Wikipedia to find the trustworthy sources. And of course, we all know and love the astronomer Carl Sagan. And he said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. That means if it's something small, like just a basic claim, well, you need little proof. If somebody says, well, we don't carry bananas at this retail store, at this grocery store in the winter because they're really hard to get, because, well, they're not really that available here in the winter. That's fairly easy to validate. It's easy to see what season we are in and where on the planet bananas grow and how much, what volume of production there is and how much it ends up costing to transport them, even if you can harvest them. But if someone makes an extraordinary claim, like the moon is getting too close, that means it's just going to keep on getting closer, and eventually it's going to be in an unsustainable orbit, and that orbit will eventually cause it to collapse inwards. So we need to be careful with pseudoscience, things that sound scientific and impressive and impress certain people because they don't consider themselves to be scientifically minded. Well, those are the kinds of things that we need to verify. So pseudoscience is something pernicious that results in our sometimes buying products that are obviously fake. For example, it's very confusing when we go to a pharmacy and they have legitimate medication and proven treatments, right? Aspirin, you can pick up right off the shelf. But a few shelves away, well, you might have some magnetic bracelets or some homeopathic medicine. All of these are placebos. Placebos means, well, they try to get you on side with fooling your brain. And the thinking is that if you can fool your brain into believing that it's getting better, then it will hopefully get better. But fooling your brain can happen in two ways. One, by you believing it, and two, by you being complicit in trying to make your brain believe it while you really know that it's false, right? Either way, you basically know that those are not real medical treatments. Those are products made to profit someone. And that profit motive is the way that you can get at the truth. Follow the money, right? We've heard that. We've not realized that that was actually a razor. It's a shortcut, right? When you hear something sketchy, something weird, why is someone sending me this chain letter? Well, follow the money, right? Somebody is tracking the forwarding of all of those letters. And at the end of the day, they get a sense of how many people received it, who forwarded it faster, who those people might be, because it eventually comes around to them and they just add those recipients to a list. And those lists are valuable because those people who forward that kind of information might be easily influenced with other messages. So suddenly you have a targeted audience and you can use that with all sorts of clickbait and scams, right? And that's a razor that we call Sagan's standard, right? It's easier to remember if we use an alliteration. An alliteration is a couple of words that start with the same letter. And so really, if there's no proof, there's no argument. Exaggerations are key. Exaggerations should be triggers. Exaggerations are opportunities for us to ridicule a silly claim, right? Obviously, we need to be unhackable enough to have the confidence to say, you know what, I looked, there's no evidence of this. Somebody made it up. Either they're joking with us or they're trying to fool us, defraud us, or scam us. So we need to use some of the tools. Luckily, we've got all sorts of powerful tools. One of my favorites is a reverse image search called TinEye. If you see suspicious posts on social media, you grab their profile image, you put it into TinEye, and in some cases, it'll come back with a stock photo of somebody from a catalog because that's a fake account, right? You find the original sources of all of these materials, and then you're playing with power. You turn the tables, right? The important thing about something that we call the scientific method is that something must be falsifiable. If a claim is made in such a way as to be impossible to test, well, then it's not falsifiable. It's just someone who's trying to challenge you into proving a negative. And we can't prove a negative, right? Now, Karl Popper's principle says, if it's not falsifiable, it's simply not true, right? And there's various flavors of this. Newton's flaming laser sword is another one. Newton had nothing to do with this. There's another one called Russell's teapot, which basically says, I bet you can't disprove that there is a teapot revolving around the sun on a geostationary orbit. And because it's a teapot, it's almost invisible. It's so small, right? But I'm telling you that it's there. You prove that it's not there, right? Now we know that somewhere on some orbit, there is a Tesla, because it was launched a few years ago by Elon Musk and his team at SpaceX. And there's a dummy sitting in the driver's seat. And we know that because we saw it being launched. We've never seen a teapot, but we can't prove that it didn't get launched because there are so many secret launches, and they carry a variety of payloads for various spy agencies. So who's to say? We can't prove a negative, right? But we can use common sense and assume that it's false. And therefore, if you find a statement that cannot be proven false because you can't prove a negative, well, then it was probably designed that way, right? And so these types of cognitive biases are very interesting. I call them brain bugs. It's one of my favorite things because, well, we all have them. We all have little vulnerabilities. And in my work, I look for vulnerabilities. In my work in security, I look for vulnerabilities, because if we can patch them before the bad guys get to them, then we can achieve a certain confidence in that, in the security of a system or a company or a website. So we're less likely to identify disinformation if it falls in line with something we already believe, right? So a lot of people will believe that homeopathic medicine is, first of all, medicine, which it isn't. It's a misnomer. And that homeopathy is a thing, which may or may not be a thing, but it's impossible. So because it breaks certain laws of physics or science, well, it's clearly wrong and false. But a lot of people are not aware of that, usually because they don't know what's involved. And so they're biased towards believing something that's printed versus, well, let's say you, who just randomly appear to choose to disprove it, or to cause them to distrust this thing, and they don't know why you choose to cause them to distrust something that they really want to believe in, right? It's very important for people to believe things that are true and question things that are clearly false, because if you go through your day that way, then you harbor vulnerabilities that will sooner or later be exploited by the wrong people, right? So be aware of those biases. Be amused when you find those biases. For example, you're thinking about someone and you go to call them, but the phone rings first and it's them. They're calling you, right? That's confirmation bias of a kind. And those are little bugs in our head that immediately want to say, well, no, we have a psychic connection. We are clearly linked through ESP. It's fun to say those things, but we don't actually believe them because they're not true. So the bias always asks the question, why? Why do people make false claims? And why do we keep seeing things that might have a negative outcome? Are these people evil? Well, that's very possible. But one of my favorite razors is Hanlon's razor. Don't attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. It's more likely that somebody ignorant has chosen to lie to you rather than someone malicious has chosen to defraud you. However, because of just how many interactions and how many websites and how many emails we see on a daily basis, and there are on the internet, clearly a small percentage of those will be malicious. And you need to be aware of that, because this is a game of probabilities. This is about statistics. There's a non-zero chance that on a daily basis, you're going to see a malicious message sent by a fraudster. And the rest of them will just be false information, maybe lies, maybe intentional ignorance, right? We just need to be aware that someone's motivation might be more than just pure evil. In general, follow the money tends to still serve us well. And we know that there's an awful lot of people out there who are profit-oriented, and they don't have to be cyber criminals. They can simply be advertisers or brands or companies that want to sell us more. And they are so desperate to sell that oftentimes they will do so under false pretenses. We talked about that emotional response. That is key, right? We have seen a number of people talk about the impulsive aspects of our brain and the more reflective aspects of our brain. Sometimes we talk about the lizard brain, we talk about the monkey, we talk about the elephant and the rider, and how difficult it is for our thinking brain to control our emotional reacting brain, right? It's a tiny little rider on top of the big strong elephant, and the elephant can be caused to swerve and start running. And that explains in many cases why, for example, you've got the most ridiculous infomercials taking place late at night, because the rider is tired at night. It's hard to think straight at night. You tend to react impulsively at night. So most infomercials are at night, and people are more likely to buy on impulse when they're really tired and they know they should be in bed, but they keep watching and they buy more products that they don't need. And those products pile up. And a lot of them are just fake. A lot of them, well, are just trivial. And a lot of them are overpriced. And that's how a lot of people make their money, by relying on some of these cognitive biases, some of these mental vulnerabilities, right? So if you feel any kind of emotion when you see an ad or a post or a claim, pause and reflect before you react. Think about what we just talked about. Think about, what would Claudiu say? Well, how should you think about something? What's a good razor to use? Look up a list of other razors and see if you like another one, right? Just if it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And that is the most famous razor ever, Occam's razor. Occam's razor says, well, does it sound like it's trying to influence or manipulate me? Does it want me to do something? Did I ask for it? So my first instinct when the phone rings and someone offers me money or there's a deal, it's, well, did I ask for anything? Did I fill out a form online? No, it's just a stranger offering me something or threatening me with something. And in exchange, I need to give them either personal information or money. Chances are that's a scam, right? Chances are that could be a crime that I'm witnessing. And if it is, I should probably report it, likely to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, right? Because it can help others. Either way, be triggered by these things, because being triggered in the right way allows you to help yourself and to protect others as well. And if you're truly unhackable, you're part of a select group of people who have those critical thinking abilities that can help other people. So it's important to remember that, right? So you're now able to evaluate information, and we can then talk about how disinformation is carefully tuned just to deceive us. Now, this is difficult if you think about it from the perspective of the other party, because human beings are different. But as we just said, most human beings have the same impulses, they have the same vulnerabilities, they have the same brain bugs, the same biases, and so you craft your message to take advantage of those brain biases. So thanks for your tolerance, thanks for your patience, and remember Claudiu's razor. Claudiu's razor says you don't have to distrust everything. You don't even have to question everything. The only thing you have to do is, before trusting, verify. Find the evidence, be satisfied with it, understand it. Right. In addition to that is the fact that you need to know that coincidences do exist. It's a statistical guarantee. Coincidences exist. Rare events do occur. That doesn't mean that you have to believe some outlandish claim. Right? Those are two different things, and you need to be able to hold two ideas in your head at the same time. That's called cognitive dissonance. That's an uncomfortable feeling. It's abused every day with calls to your confirmation bias, right? Brands do this a lot. Ignore the bad things attributed to this brand. This brand is good, so it can't be bad, right? Yes, it can. A brand or a company can be bad. It's done bad things in the past. It will likely do bad things in the future. Well, you can benefit from its products today. It's up to you whether you want to trust it based on the information. So the information is out there. Go get it. Go find it. Enjoy yourself. And welcome to the world of unhackability.